Welcome everybody to this webinar, Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, which contribution of the agri-food sector to the European Commission's plan, organized by Coldiretti, Filiera Italia and Farm Europe, that is working on food issues with its project Eat Europe. My name is Angelo Di Mambro. I'm an Italian journalist. I'm based in Brussels since 2011, covering agriculture and food news, and more recently also the EU Green Deal and health news for ANSA, the main Italian press agency. I will be the moderator today, and I'll spend just a few words of introduction. More than introduction is a technical information, let's say. To the speakers, I will be quite strict with the timing, but please take this into account. If we keep the time, we will have the 10-15 minutes Q&A at the end of the panel. Please use the chat to ask your question, identify yourself and tell to whom the question is addressed. The Farm Europe staff will support me in that. For the speakers, please mute yourself when not speaking. The interpretation is available in English and French so far. Italian will arrive soon, we hope. If you want to share the screen, just push the button to share the screen, and that's it. I'll pass the floor now for the welcome speeches to Alessandra Moretti. Alessandra Moretti is there? No?
I don't see her.
So, Paolo de Castro, please, the floor is yours for your welcome speech.
Thank you very much, Angelo. Thank you very much, everybody. I will do my speech in English, of course, because if I understood well, we don't have still the Italian interpretation. But let me start saying thank you very much to Farm Europe, to Filiera Italia and Coldiretti, because it was very, very important, this reflection, this seminar today, because we need to clarify very well that the fighting against cancer is of course a great opportunity for all of us, no question about. We want to create the correct math, you know, to go in the direction to fight cancer. Anyway, what we would like to underline, and I really thanks Professor Frédéric Léroy and all the experts that will take the floor during the roundtable, because I think we need to avoid the ideological consequence of such fighting of cancer, because this is the key. We know, in particular, the Mediterranean country know very well how was strong the importance of the Mediterranean diet, how is important the word, the consumer, consapevole, come si dice? I don't know. The right consumer, you know, not to go in exceed alcohol, red meat, or other important food. We need to have a sustainable consumer. And that is a part of our culture. This is part of our behavior, natural behavior in our countries, in our society. So when we said we want to use and not abuse the alcohol, this is very clear for us. And I'm sure that Irène Tolleret, she is our chair in wine intergroup, she will explain what does it mean when we talk about an alcohol moderation consumer, because we of course want to avoid, and we are in favor of the fight on alcoholists, of course, which is one of the important causes of the cancer disease. So thanks again to everybody. I think the discussion today will be very important to describe that the farmers and all the farmer community are in favor, of course, on this important European cancer plan. And what we would like to understand is why it's important to describe to our consumer the right way to consume, not just, you know, an exceed that make a lot of problems, as we know, when we go in this direction. So I'm sorry for my English, and I thank you very much. Maybe I will take the floor, if I may, in the later time in my own language. Thank you very much, everybody. And I saw Alessandra, so I think we switch Alessandra, but now I think the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paolo Di Castro. Thank you for your speech, and I would like to thank Farm Europe, Filiere Italia, Coldiretti, Eat Euro for this important moment in which we can confront between us different positions, but I think that we need to explain the position of Europe about health.
Buongiorno, spero che mi sentiate in italiano. Io comincio solo adesso a tradurre perché mi sono state assegnate le lingue in questo momento. Molti di noi, dice la dottoressa Moretti, vedranno dopo gli interventi di oggi avranno la possibilità ovviamente di dire la loro e di condividere con tutti i presenti
grazie ad Alessandra Moretti e anche a Paolo per l'introduzione. Quindi benissimo, ancora qualche informazione tecnica e intanto
if we keep the timing, keep the schedule, we will have 10-15 minutes of Q&A at the end of the panel. Please use the chat to ask your question, identify yourself and tell to whom the question is addressed. And then if you need to share the screen, dear speakers, you can do it just pushing the button on the icon on the platform. Interpretation is available now in English, French, and Italian. Italian is available on the Japanese channel. And what else? Please mute yourself if you don't speak. Let's start. Paolo Di Castro said that we have a mission. The mission is common, but also the fact that every stakeholder must be kept on board in a sense. And it's up to the Commission to promote the widest participation possible, balancing the diversity of views also that are existing on the topic. That's a difficult task. We like to start from difficult and tough things. So we will kickstart with the presentation of Madame Claire Burry, Deputy Director General DG Sante. Madame Burry, you have the floor for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Angelo, and good morning, everybody. Good morning, Paolo. Good morning, Alessandra. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's really a great pleasure to be here this morning. I'd like to thank Farm Europe and the other organisers for bringing everybody together today to have this important discussion about how the agri-food sector can contribute to Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. I'd like to talk briefly, if I may, about three things. First of all, to recall what the objectives of the cancer plan are, what our goals are and where we're going. Secondly, I want to focus on the prevention pillar of the cancer plan, which I think is the most important for the agri-food sector. And thirdly, I want to say some words about front of pack labelling and alcohol labelling, because obviously they're in the farm to fork strategy as well, but those are issues which are very much at the top of the agenda today, both in terms of the cancer plan and farm to fork. So first of all, on the objectives of the cancer plan, obviously this is one of the Commission's main initiatives, and it's a key priority in the area of public health. It sets out a number of ambitious targets. It's got 10 flagship initiatives and numerous actions which go across all the stages of the cancer journey, from prevention, early detection, diagnosis and treatment, to quality of life of cancer patients and survivors. Now, the goal of putting all those parts of the journey together are to try and make cancer a shared political, operational and scientific priority. As you said, Angelo, what we have to do is to bring everybody together to pull in the same direction. The new approach that we've set out, we hope will help us to share resources, expertise and health data, which is so crucial these days, on promising treatments, but also that it will even out some of the inequalities that exist between the member states. This time around as well, we also have 4 billion from the EU for Health programme, which hopefully should mean that we can really make a difference in terms of where we want to go on preventing and curing cancer. The reality is, unfortunately, still that there are big differences between member states. There are also big differences within member states. And these inequalities are also reflected in access to prevention. I think, as Paolo said, we need all to work together to fight cancer in the first instance, but also to try and deal with these inequalities, in particular as regards unhealthy lifestyles, and to make this a success for all Europeans. So turning now to the first pillar of the cancer plan, which is to prevent the preventable through actions focused on healthy lifestyles, environmental pollution, and of course, vaccination. Now, through the pillar on cancer prevention, the plan wants to address risk factors and unhealthy lifestyles such as obesity, physical inactivity, smoking, and harmful alcohol consumption. The focus on these behavioural risk factors should also benefit other non-communicable diseases such as cardiovascular disease, obesity, and diabetes. The examples on prevention include improving health literacy on cancer risk, making sure there's a better understanding of the risks. And we want to update the European Code on Cancer. We want to work towards a tobacco-free generation. I think we're going in the right direction there, but there's still some progress to be made. Addressing unhealthy diets, physical activity, of course, and harmful use of alcohol. It's also important that we can align the air quality standards with the WHO guidelines and reduce exposure to carcinogenic substances. In 2020, the Commission launched a joint action on implementation of best practices in the area of nutrition. And this joint action includes various initiatives which focus on reformulation, reducing aggressive marketing to children of foods which are high in fat, salt, and sugar, and public procurement of food in public institutions. This should build on the outcomes of the Euremo project from 2019, under which a food ingredients database of processed foods products is being developed. The idea is that this database will be publicly available and it will provide a baseline against which we can track progress in the area of food reformulation. And I'd like to invite all of you here today to dialogue with other stakeholders and the Commission on the EU Health Policy Platform.
Avec les différentes parties prenantes, avec les différentes autorités, travaillons sur la plateforme qui existe justement pour partager nos connaissances, pour diffuser également.
Per l'appunto è quello di fare un po' di marketing, diciamo, il più possibile per disseminare le nostre conoscenze, le nostre informazioni.
Prevention. The scope for action is therefore immense. Much more focus is needed on disease prevention and health promotion. This should decrease the pressures on our healthcare and social protection systems, as well as ensuring the growth and productivity of our economy by securing a healthy workforce. In turn, this focus will support member states to reach the UN Sustainable Development and the WHO targets on non-communicable diseases. I'd like to turn now to the front of pack labelling and alcohol labelling. So harmonised mandatory front of pack labelling is one of the actions in the Beating Cancer Plan, but also, as you know, the Farm to Fork strategy announced that the Commission will propose by the end of 2022 harmonised mandatory front of pack nutrition labelling to enable consumers to make health conscious food choices. At this stage, no choice has been made yet on the front of pack scheme, and I want to underline that, no choices have been made. The choice will depend on the work that we're doing at the moment, which will result in an impact assessment. In December, we set out different options, which are based on the types of available schemes already developed within the EU. The Inception Impact Assessment was published and we got more than 450 responses to the contributions, showing how interested stakeholders and citizens are in the subject and confirming that those options are, I think, a good basis, a good starting point for the further impact assessment. We need to look at what the impact will be on consumers, food business operators, in particular the SMEs, member states, the internal market and public health, amongst others. And we will go ahead now having more targeted consultations on each of those issues. I want to emphasize at this point, because I think it's very important, that the Commission is fully aware of the specificities of some agricultural products, such as olive oil and products with geographical indications and differences in national dietary habits. You referred to that at the beginning, Paolo, in terms of the Mediterranean diet, and we know that that diet has proven its worth in terms of the benefits that it can give us. So these elements will all be taken into account during the process, and we will explore the possibility to apply specific conditions to certain products where that is justified. The scheme has to be based on science, so we are consulting the European Food Safety Agency. We've also mandated the Joint Research Centre to update its scientific literature review, because we need to understand the impact that the existing schemes are having on consumer understanding, consumer choices and health. I mean, the schemes are out there, but we still don't really understand what impacts they're having on consumers. It's very important that we understand that before we decide what direction of travel we want to go in at European level. We know that there are different views between member states and the stakeholders, but most of them agree at the end of the day, and I think it's better for business, it's better for farmers, it's better for everyone across the board if we have a harmonised scheme at European level, because this situation where we have different schemes at national level is not really desirable in terms of what we want from an internal market in Europe. I want to highlight that the front of pack labelling is important, but it's not the only tool to guide consumers towards healthier eating habits. And awareness, communication and education is of the utmost importance. The Commission, therefore, will continue to provide financial and administrative support to Member States for promoting healthy lifestyles and eating habits. By working together in a constructive way, we think we can find the best solution for European citizens, and that it's also realistically achievable for our food business operators. The views of all parties involved are very important to get us to the right balance. Moving now to alcohol labelling. Obviously, the cancer plan recognises that alcohol-related harm is a major public health concern in the EU. Paolo, you said at the beginning, we need the EU citizen, if I can borrow the Italian term, which is consapevole or enlightened, understanding and aware. So we have to provide information that allows consumers to choose a healthy and sustainable diet and to reduce health-related costs. We strongly believe in the need to regulate and harmonise the labelling of alcoholic beverages as any other food. There's no difference there from the Commission's perspective. Of course, we recognise that there have already been very significant efforts made by the sector to provide additional information to consumers on alcoholic beverages through self-commitments. So the Commission's plan is to try and build on what has been done already. We want to build on the practical experience of the alcoholic beverage sector, as well as the forthcoming Common Market Review Regulation on wine labelling. It's important that we don't, we don't start here with a clean piece of paper. We don't start with a completely clean table. We already have some actions that have been taken. Those actions are justified, they go in the right direction, so they should also be taken into account. Ladies and gentlemen, without action now, by 2035, cancer cases are estimated to increase by almost 25%. That will make it the leading cause of death within the EU. We have to do something now. Now is the time to act, to promote healthy diets. Now is the time to make a difference. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you to Claire Bury for the speech and for having given already crucial pieces of information on the two big issues, to the two, let's say, controversial issues. Now I will give the floor to Frédéric Léroy, that is a professor at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. Is the scientific point of view. I have to say also that unfortunately Madame Bury has informed us that she has to leave after this first part of the webinar. Thank you. We want to thank her for her participation, and I think all the participants to the webinar will knock on your door for being listened to and for bearing their point of views on how to act together for achieving the results in the missions of beating cancers. So thank you, Madame Bioghi, and now the floor goes to Frédéric Léroy.
Thank you. Can you please enable share screen because it seems to be deactivated? Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for inviting me here today as a speaker to what I consider to be indeed a very important debate. I applaud the Commission's cancer plan because obviously action is both necessary and urgent. We're talking about a devastating disease, and the challenge we're facing is, of course, multidimensional, and that makes it so difficult. We do know, however, that our lifestyles are involved, and we also know that this includes the Western diet. Now, of course, this doesn't imply that necessarily everything we're eating has a decisive impact on the disease. In a cookbook analysis, some researchers have pointed out that 40 out of 50 of the most commonly used ingredients in the cookbook were in some way associated with cancer based on what has been reported in studies. So either promoting it or preventing it. Such information, of course, is rather meaningless. And to make things worse, in my own research of media discourse, we uncovered a very concerning trend of sensationalism. Over the first 15 years of the century, headlines are becoming more inflated and I would say hysterical. Whereas in the early part of the century, we found such reasonable titles as, for instance, red meat can raise cancer risk, which opens a debate. But it ended up with screaming headlines comparing, for instance, bacon to cigarettes, or claims that one steak a week would increase the chance of colorectal cancer by 2/5. Now that sounds impressive, but most of the readers have no idea how to situate this. So what I would like to bring today is some words of caution, and especially a plea for contextualization as to get the dietary focus right. I will talk quite a bit about meat because that's one of the most debated ones, and a great case study. For instance, claims that bacon increase colorectal cancer with 18%, that sounds indeed impressive, to the point that some people argue now for warning labels as on cigarette packs. In reality, however, this is not wrong, scientifically speaking, but what is being reported is a so-called relative risk, whereby the more meaningful number for pragmatic interpretation would be an absolute risk. And the absolute risk here, the corresponding risk, is about 1%. Or as to state the same message differently, the risk to never develop colorectal cancer would decrease from 94% to 93% when eating lots of processed meats, which suddenly sounds a lot less scary, but of course it doesn't make for the same headlines. What is usually also left aside is that strength of the association is something that really matters. And you can see it in this figure, where the effect of having lots of belly fat, for instance, on colorectal cancer leads to a relative risk of 6. Now you need to multiply the influence, the incidence of the disease with a factor 6. That's substantial. That's a strong association. That's very high, and it's likely causal, just like smoking and lung cancer. There are also mechanisms in place to explain that link, because visceral fat is highly inflammatory and it also affects the endocrine system. The 18% relative risk we just saw for processed meats or for meat means that we have to multiply the incidence with a number that is close to 1, which means 1.18 basically. And if we multiply a number with a number close to 1, we more or less end up with the same number. But the main problem is that at such low levels of association, we just cannot be sure that the association is also causal or created by an artifact instead. Now, correlation is not the same as causality, not necessarily so. In the best case, it creates a hypothesis. So mostly because the data are confounded by healthy user bias, among other types of bias. And that's because we know that people that, that consume lots of meat are also the ones that will have more unhealthy lifestyles. And indeed, they will also have more belly fat. Now, we can try to correct statistically for such things as smoking or alcohol or being overweight, but it's impossible to correct for all lifestyle interference. So if we want to evaluate data, what we need is proper standards of evidence. And in clinical medicine, one of the gold standards is to use the grade system. Now, that has also been done comprehensively for red and processed meats by a consortium including two of the founding fathers of the grade system, among which Gordon Guyatt from McMaster's University. And the conclusion was clear. The evidence we're talking about in this case is weak to very weak. It's not absent, but it's very weak. And because of this, together with the trivial absolute risk and the fact that people are just attached to meat, and which, by the way, is also, of course, an excellent source of nutrients, the researchers concluded that there's probably no need to advise a reduction of meat in this context. Of course, this is only talking about the health issue. It's not talking about sustainability, which is a completely different debate and contextual in its own right. This brings me to one of the main problems in today's nutritional sciences, being the unwarranted use of causal language, which poses a systemic problem and undermines credibility of the field. So even if we look at what the WHO is actually saying about eating meat, they have clearly stated that it has not yet been established as a cause of cancer. And their working group clearly identifies the problem of potential bias and of confounding. So what is all the talk about red meat and being a cancer hazard coming from WHO? Well, indeed, processed meat has been classified as a class 1 cancer hazard and red meat as a class 2A hazard. But even if we assume that this is valid, suppose that this is something we can agree on, we still need to differentiate hazard from risk. Because a shark, for instance, is a hazard, but it's only swimming with sharks under certain conditions that will provide you with the risk. And sunlight is a good example because it is situated in the same category 1 as processed meats, but nobody would avoid the sun. Even if, of course, we need to prevent ourselves from burning. It's the context that matters because sun brings us joy, and indeed it brings us also vitamins. So the metaphor is quite useful. Being a hairdresser, by the way, is in the same category as red meat. So it all depends on the context, and you need a risk assessment to go from the hazard to the risk. And that was beyond the scope of the actual IRC WHO panel. And even if one would assume that causality has been proven, the context of the diet will still be a major factor. We see that epidemiological associations tend to diminish when taken out of a Western, especially US kind of context, and when the study design is improved, or when dietary context is taken into account properly. In this study, for instance, which is, I agree, it's a small one, but it shows how red meat is associated with more cancer in people that eat little fruits and vegetables. But also it shows at the same time that for those people who eat lots of veggies, the more red meat one eats, the less cancer they get. So that underlines the contextuality. So where to go from here? Let me present the following overview of the historical human diet. For 99% of our existence on the planet, we've been hunter-gatherers, eating a variety of animal foods and plants, all sorts. Then came the Neolithic era, and during the Neolithic, we obtained access to additional staples, cereals, pulses, dairy, among other things. And it's only since a handful of generations, really, since a very, very recent time, that we've also started to transition to the so-called Western diet, which means basically ultra-processed foods to substantial degrees. So rather than creating an artificial line between the animal and plant categories, as we now often see, suggesting a divide between what's sustainable and what's healthy and what's not. I think we should maybe focus on the elephant in the room, which is the recent addition of the ultra-processed foods. And we do have a methodological scientific framework available, which is the NOVA system designed by the Monteiro group in Brazil. And maybe we should start designing food pyramids more like this. not based on the contextual associations which are leading down to a very difficult path, but on the true root causes of chronic disease: excess body fat, insulin resistance, and also metaflammation. And of course, we can prepare meat the wrong way. For instance, we can think about barbecuing until it's black, then you probably better not eat it. And we also better consume it in a proper dietary wholesome context, focusing on nourishment and being careful that we're not starting to excessively vilify those wholesome foods that are part of traditional diets and start blaming them for what the Western diet is doing to us. Just because they may be still included in that diet, it doesn't mean that they're the actual cause. So in essence, I thank you for your attention, and I would especially like to underline that the contextuality of the decisions we're going to make is something that has to receive the maximum of our attention. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Léroy, for the brilliant presentation. So in which we have seen the tricks and the flows of causal language. Professor Léroy remembered the difference between risk and hazard. That is something that is missing many times in the debate. But and about the dietary context and contextuality of data. Also, Professor Léroy made reference to the NOVA system, the ultra-processed food index. That is something that appears to, let's say, the EU is looking at other experience, because as Madame Bury said, the EU Commission will base its plans on the labels, nutritional labels that are existing in already. So, but maybe a look to the NOVA system is not something to be excluded a priori. Before starting the panel, I would give the floor again to Paolo De Castro, because at the beginning the English, the Italian translation was not available, and he was obliged to speak in English. If he wants to add very few things and in Italian, so in your mother tongue, so in our mother tongue. So please, Paolo, before starting the panel, 3 minutes.
Grazie, Angelo. Ma intanto grazie ancora una volta a Farm Europe, Filiere Italia e Coldiretti per questa bella opportunità. Le parole
Thank you for this great opportunity to take the floor. It was clearly said at the very beginning, and what Mr. Léroy said is also very clear. What is important is to have a correct and well-balanced diet. We have to make the difference between consumption and overconsumption. And this agricultural world today is represented by many speakers. Many of you do represent the rural and agricultural world, and there is no counter-indication of consuming meat in the fight against cancer. So we can win this major fight with an agriculture that is producing quality products, quality meat, and with consumers that we have to educate. It is of the utmost importance to insist upon information and transparency regarding the consumers when it comes to labeling. We are currently having this discussion about labeling, and this is, of course, very appropriate. But again, I repeat, what we should focus on is information. We have to inform and educate consumers so that they make well-reasoned and balanced decisions. We're not promoting one product to the disadvantage of another product. No, we have to give the consumers the possibility to make a choice through an appropriate labeling. And that's why contributions like the ones we have today are paramount. We have, of course, to focus on this scientific approach. This scientific approach is there to help us. The ideological approach is a very risky one and could lead us to the wrong conclusions. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I'm sure that the debate will help us to have a clear idea on this topic. We need to have a very healthy and well-balanced diet. That's the most important thing. And of course, Mediterranean diet has been recognized as a heritage and by UNESCO, and this is very important.
Before, since I see that Madame Bury is still there, may I ask a question, Madame Bury?
Yes, of course.
Yes, it's just one. I asked that also to your colleagues at the Commission when the Farm to Fork strategy was presented. The NOVA approach, the index based on ultra-processed food, is something that the Commission is taking into consideration.
Of course, we will take everything into consideration that's relevant for making the right decision. So I understand, I mean, I heard very clearly what Mr. Léroy was saying, Professor Léroy, and I hear what you're saying as well. This could be very useful evidence for us to take into account. So yes, we will take everything into account. I mean, it's not, obviously we want to look at the existing schemes. We want to understand what the impact of the existing schemes has been, but we will look wider than that as well. So yes, we will take other systems into account as well.
Thank you, Madame Bury. So let's start to hear the contribution and the ideas from the agri-food sector. But first, the floor goes to Irène Tolleret, a member of the European Parliament from Renew Europe. 5 minutes, Madame Tolleret.
Merci beaucoup, merci à tous les intervenants.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks to the organizers of this great roundtable on a very important issue. First, we have to thank the European Union for this plan against cancer. End of November, I organized a meeting around this issue. And during this seminar, we've been able to see that producers were a bit concerned about this plan. But nevertheless, we had a very interesting and constructive exchange with all the stakeholders. To fight and to win the battle against cancer, we should not only put the finger on some products.
Réside dans la consommation abusive. Et ce principe peut aussi s'appliquer à d'autres produits agroalimentaires. Je suis convaincue que toute interdiction entraîne la transgression des règles. Il est nécessaire que tous les acteurs de la chaîne alimentaire travaillent ensemble avec le soutien du monde scientifique pour produire et guider le citoyen vers un mode de vie sain, sans limiter les libertés individuelles, mais en informant correctement le consommateur. Pour réduire l'exposition des jeunes à la commercialisation des boissons alcoolisées, la Commission voudrait réduire la commercialisation en ligne. Il est clair que dans le contexte de la crise actuelle de la Covid-19, toute mesure orientée à réduire les achats online tuerait la seule possibilité de trouver des nouveaux débouchés pour les secteurs les plus affectés par la fermeture du canal Horeca, qui absorbe 50% de la valeur des ventes réalisées par le secteur viticole européen. La Commission souhaiterait également se servir du programme de promotion horizontale pour réduire la consommation d'alcool et d'autres produits agricoles comme la viande. L'éventuelle exclusion de ces produits des campagnes promotionnelles telles qu'on les connaît actuellement est devenue une vraie hantise pour les professionnels. Il ne faut pas oublier que pour un secteur comme le vin, la promotion est essentielle pour son développement commercial. Elle constitue un outil indispensable à sa réussite, et sa réussite, elle là, c'est un acquis de la politique européenne. L'élimination des campagnes de promotion de vin équivaudrait à renoncer à la croissance économique d'un secteur qui est stratégique pour la France et qui fonctionne très très bien pour toute l'Union européenne. Toutefois, comme la Commission elle-même le signale, 4 cas de cancer sur 10 sont évitables. Il est donc important de revoir le rôle que peut jouer la nutrition, mais également le rôle de l'activité physique et bien sûr le tabac et la consommation d'alcool, parmi les facteurs qui contribuent à l'apparition de cette maladie. Actuellement, une personne sur 10 n'est pas au courant du lien entre le cancer et la consommation abusive d'alcool. Un travail d'information aux consommateurs s'impose. Pour cela, je pense qu'il faut impliquer directement les secteurs concernés afin de les rendre complices de cette stratégie contre le cancer. Je voudrais souligner que depuis des années, le secteur viticole participe dans des campagnes destinées à promouvoir la consommation modérée. Il est pertinent de renforcer les politiques de contrôle de l'alcool en recentrant davantage les efforts sur la réduction de la consommation abusive. Et pour réussir ceci, il faut travailler sur plusieurs fronts. Pour moi, le premier front, c'est l'éducation. Les programmes de redistribution de produits agricoles dans les écoles devraient être élargis pour que les enfants prennent davantage conscience, les nouvelles générations, des bénéfices d'une diète saine dans laquelle je crois que l'alcool peut être présent pour autant qu'il est consommé avec modération.
Alcohol can be present provided it is consumed with moderation. When people are very young, we have to tell them and educate them so that they do not over-consume alcohol. In November, we had Ramon Estrouche, a teacher at the University of Barcelona, and he said that the alcohol-related risk of developing cancer has to be seen in a broader framework, has to be contextualized. Of course, overconsumption of alcohol is going to lead to cancer, but if you drink wine in a moderate way, especially in the framework of the Mediterranean diet, and if you add to that a healthy lifestyle, you're not going to increase the risk of developing cancer. The fact that we have also warnings and...
Sulle etichette fanno parte di questo progetto e vorrei sottolineare che le proposte future sul piano d'azione non dovrebbero essere utilizzate come scusa per interrompere il negoziato sull'etichettatura alimentare del vino nell'ambito della riforma attuale sul regolamento del mercato. Non bisogna aspettare quindi ulteriormente per andare ecco, ricordo che il Parlamento europeo si è già espresso proprio sulla questione dell'etichettatura, che questa mattina è una preoccupazione in tutto il mondo e segnatamente nell'Unione Europea. L'Organizzazione Mondiale della Salute, della sanità, circa il 4% dei cancri sono da attribuire al consumo di alcol. Nel 2018 180.000 casi di cancro in Europa sono stati collegati al consumo di alcol. L'incidenza è più importante presso gli uomini. Penso che l'obiettivo da perseguire della Commissione europea è lodevole. Penso altresì che occorre riflettere bene per tutti gli strumenti da porre in essere per evitare misure sproporzionate e porre in essere una campagna efficace. Grazie per la vostra attenzione. Grazie Irene. Allora, intanto parlo un po' francese, parlo inglese, chiedo scuse.
Thank you to Madame Irène Tolleret. We have receiving also the questions already. One is addressed specifically to Mrs. Bury, but she's not there anymore. She left us as she announced before. So I will start asking, because one of those is for Philippe. Sorry, is for Professor Léroy, and it comes from Xavier. Xavier, I can't read it. Sorry. It's Xavier. I don't know. I don't remember the surname. It disappeared. Sorry. The question is the current Nutri-Score used in France, in Belgium, and so on, really suitable for cancer prevention? Would it be necessary, with a view to preventing cancer, to take into account the processed side of food in Nutri-Score type rating system? This is for Professor Léroy.
Thank you for the question. Well, I've since a while expressed my concerns about the Nutri-Score in being a very reductionist system for, again, a very complex disease. we're labeling foods with a single color or a single letter. You get very bizarre outcomes. Sometimes you have highly scored products that are basically, again, ultra processed foods, and you will have low score products that have low scores and are again wholesome foods. For instance, I recently bought some shrimp in the supermarket, and it's just North Sea shrimp, and they had a C, for instance. I even saw fresh sardines, they had a C. You have very bizarre outcomes, and that has to do with the algorithms underlying the calculation, which are very debatable. So as a way forward for cancer, personally, I don't see it as the best approach because it contradicts my main message, as I stated before. The degree of processing is something we have to take with care, though, because it's not so much the processing as such. If we talk about NOVA, it's not so much the scale of processing. It's not the gradient from processed to ultra-processed that is making the big difference. Ultra-processed foods as such are a different category for many reasons, not only in the degree of processing, but also in the way how they are presented and are meant to take over other foods. It has to do with the fact that they are hyperpalatable and the fact that they are low in nutrients. So it is much more, there's nothing wrong with the processing. There's something wrong with certain kinds of formulation. And as I tried to convey in my previous message, I think those are the ones that deserve most of our attention, and they should get the priority in this story.
Thank you, Professor Léroy. Second question, and I address this to the panelists that are going to take the floor in a few minutes. It comes from Gabriela Galindo from Politico.eu. Does the Commission see the growing expansion success of frontal pack label system like Nutri-Score across borders and indeed across major food makers and retailers as a challenge in their path towards a label harmonization, especially in the case that you do not choose this system in the end? And second question, how do you view concerns that the development of digital labels in the wine sector, for example, may undermine citizens' access to nutritional information? And the second question, I'm let's say front-loading the question so that also the panelists can already answer if they want. A second question comes from Maria Vasile, that she's asking what are we doing with chemicals, fertilizers, pesticide additives, and the effect of mixed of them on our health. So it's the so-called cocktail effect. We know that the neuroendocrine tumors are increasing, and the cause is the effect of the chemicals on endocrine system according to scientific clinical trials. And she asked a question on what are we doing for the mixture of chemicals? This is the question. I will. If Professor Léroy wants to say something on this latter, maybe a question on endocrine disruptors and chemical mixtures.
Well, sorry. I'm not a toxicologist on the chemical side, so I'm a bit prudent to say much here. But what we do know is that we're exposed to all kinds of chemical disruptors that act on the endocrine system. They come from all sorts of categories. They provide a background to which we are exposed and which we will have to live with because it's part of our industrial setting. And we have getting good information is difficult because we're talking about long-term exposures at low doses. But I would leave the decisions on the particular compounds to the actual toxicologist, which is not my expertise. I know it's just a very, very difficult assessment. And I also know that we should distinguish between chemicals. I mean, it's not because it is chemical that it's necessarily bad. It's certain chemicals are clearly acting as disruptors. Others are much less worrying. So it's very much a matter of expertise for the proper scientists involved here.
So many questions are arriving actually, but we have to go ahead with the panel. So I would suggest, given that most of those questions are addressed to specific speakers, one is for Frédéric Léroy from Politico, another is from Mr. De Castro from José María Castilla-Baro from Asaja. So maybe you can answer in the chat actually while we are progressing with the panel. We will go ahead with Ettore Prandini, President of Coldiretti. Mr. Prandini, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Grazie, buona giornata a tutti, grazie per coloro che hanno accolto l'invito che come Coldiretti abbiamo voluto estendere per parlare di un tema particolarmente significativo.
There's a slight issue now with the interpretation. We can hear two interpretations on the French channel.
Economic values that our countries represent. We got to try to enhance the good lifestyles. This is the
informazioni cittadini e consumatori, creare un rapporto forte di collaborazione con tutti i medici, con i nutrizionisti, con i pediatri, che spesso e volentieri ci invitano proprio a prendere posizione sul modificare radicalmente quelle che sono le abitudini dei cittadini e dei consumatori stessi. Fare una battaglia di negazionismo nel confronto del consumo della carne o anche in modo corretto del consumo del vino o di alcolici crea non un beneficio, ma un danno. Condivido totalmente quello che diceva Frédéric Léroy. Penso che sia il punto di partenza rispetto a un nuovo approccio che noi dovremo avere. Noi come mondo produttivo, ma soprattutto rivolto alla politica europea, che non si pieghi rispetto a quelli che sono anche degli interessi di grandi gruppi di potere o multinazionali, che hanno ovviamente un interesse rilevante. Proviamo solo ad immaginarci oggi, prima si parlava, veniva posta una domanda sulla diminuzione che ci deve essere rispetto all'utilizzo di prodotti chimici. Però nel cibo questi tipi di politiche, laddove dovessero essere attuate con forza, a costo
chemical products, for example, to replace, for example, traditional food with food which is processed in laboratories. So if you don't inform people as properly, they won't know.
Ancora una volta dobbiamo lavorare per quanto riguarda il tema dell'etichettatura. È vero, un'etichettatura anche qua, che sia puntuale, che sia trasparente, che dia evidenza, ad esempio, della provenienza.
L'étiquetage est également ici très important. Nous devons essayer de voir
and the correct and constant information that is given to the good diets. Mediterranean diet
è un patrimonio vero e proprio, non solo perché è già stato riconosciuto, ma perché è il più corretto stile e modello di consumo che noi possiamo offrire ai consumatori europei e anche del resto del mondo. E ancora una volta un altro aspetto di grande importanza sul quale noi ci dovremmo confrontare è il principio di reciprocità. Anche sotto questo punto di vista noi dobbiamo evolvere, iniziare a credere e chiedere che tutte le volte che giustamente noi attuiamo una politica a livello europeo che ha come
policy at European level that aims to reduce all the chemical products and all the things that are the elements that are involved in processing phases. At the same time, we must provide for the right conditions so that the same rules are respected and followed both to those countries who export from Europe, but also to those who import.
Fra Stati membri in modo allargato per creare una condizione di informazione puntuale, costante,
be punctual and very precise in communication and information. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Prandini.
Information, education, these are the three keywords.
Partage d'informations, ce sont là vraiment les mots-clés que nous pouvons retenir.
The next one, I will give the floor to Arnold Puech d'Alissa, from the FNSEA. Monsieur Puech d'Alissac, la parola è a voi.
Signor D'Alissac, la parola a lei.
Merci Angelo. Vous m'entendez là?
Oui.
Grazie Angelo. Perfetto. Allora, intanto grazie a Farmi Europa per questa iniziativa.
Tous les groupes dans la société ont tous peur du cancer.
We are all afraid of cancer. In her intervention, Mrs. Claire Bury presented the Commission's program, the way Professor Léroy tried to set the scene.
La contestualizzazione, ecco, tutto questo mostra la difficoltà dell'argomento che stiamo trattando. Intanto Christian Lambert, la mia presidente, non ha potuto, ahimè, liberarsi.
Je voulais arriver, dire un petit mot sur deux ou trois questions, 2 ou 3 points qui ont été abordés juste avant. Tout d'abord, l'étiquetage et le Nutri-Score. Voilà. Le Nutri-Score est venu notamment à la base un petit peu dans mon pays, la France. Je ne suis pas persuadé que ce soit le meilleur des systèmes, notamment parce qu'il compare des aliments au kilo et non pas à la portion. Quand vous comparez 1 kilo de carottes avec 1 kilo de viande, vous pouvez trouver qu'effectivement les carottes
le carote sono ottime per la salute, certo. E
très bon. Si vous comparez 1 kilo de betterave rouge avec 1 kilo d'œuf, vous allez voir que...
Quindi è vero che effettivamente sapete che se paragonate 2 cose come una verdura nuova, se voi poi dovete dire a tutti, se dite a tutti mangiate questa verdura e non le uova, effettivamente questo mostrerà l'assurdità del sistema. Quindi io direi che sarebbe effettivamente molto più saggio operare diversamente, in maniera più trasparente, e bisognerebbe veramente andare verso una maggiore informazione piuttosto che un divieto.
I see behind Irene a very beautiful heart with the rainbow colors. I know that these colors are also used in the Nutri-Score. This system is way too simple. It is really too simplistic. And this is what we think as nutritionists. Then a second question. The risk of cancer because of pesticides and fertilizers, chemicals that are used. A very wide survey has been conducted, and it has shown that farmers have less cancers than the rest of the population. And they have also a slightly longer life expectancy than others for 2 reasons. Maybe because the products that they are using is at the end of the day not that dangerous. And of course, they know how to use also these chemicals and products. And second, physical exercise. Of course, farmers, you know, are not professionals sitting before a computer all day. So it's, of course, they have a healthier lifestyle. And I think that this is also something that should be recalled. Now, this being said, we do understand that there are some risks related to products. We understand that, and I think that they should be taken into account, especially when alternatives exist. If we need a specific chemical to protect crops or to protect animals, if we do away with this chemical, it would mean the end of those crops or the death of these animals. So we have to be reasonable, I would say. No ban, no prohibition without interdiction or without justification. So we really would like to support this cancer plan. We really need to be able to use these products that very often are discriminated against, and we need to show moderation. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Puech. I think that the message is indeed very clear. Once again, we need to advocate for more physical.
Ho parlato di stile di vita, tutto questo è importante. Sostegno.
Mais aussi opportunité pour clarifier de certains lieux, comment certaines conventions sur certains produits qu'ils mettent dans une lumière, une mauvaise lumière. Alors, on va progresser. There is another question for Frédéric Léroy before going.
Je vois qu'il y avait également une autre question posée à Frédéric Léroy. Professeur Léroy, on a tendance à critiquer certains produits agricoles tels que l'huile, par exemple.
For a fair balance between proteins and fruits and vegetables. At the moment, many industry players are investing in meat substitutes. Do we have any idea of the impact of these processed substitutes on health? Professor Léroy.
Yes, I would always advocate for the most common sense approach, which is falling back to what we know from history is doing the job for us. The traditional diets have provided us with rich opportunities to vary and to obtain valuable nutrition. I think the focus should always be on essential nutrition embedded in a cultural framework that covers the diversity of the European continent. What I see happening now is a very reductionist transition, usually focused on the concept of protein and ignoring most of the other things. So it's always about protein transition, and then they offer imitation foods that would cover the protein levels. But food is so much more than that. It is a very complicated affair, and it's also much more than a metabolic affair. Food is at the heart of our identities. It's at the heart of our cultures. I don't see it particularly as a very good evolution if we're going to leave all that aside and we're going to create all kinds of synthetic substitutes or all kinds of different imitation foods, taking over what our generations have known before. I will not say that if you from time to time consume such products, it wouldn't be necessarily bad for you. I see it more as a structural paradigm that is changing and which I think is not for the better. We have many different solutions within our omnivore spectrum, because in the end we are omnivores. We have creatively found so many good, robust solutions over the ages. And I think we should not just throw that away and actually cherish that and value that and try to improve it, yes, but not so radically as sometimes proposed.
It's the omnivore's dilemma that is coming back.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Léroy. Did you have the occasion to reply to Gabriela Galindo or if you want to reply to answer her publicly?
I will. Or I can, if there's time, I can do it quickly as well.
Yes, a few minutes. Gabriela Galindo from Politico for Professor Léroy. Given your message from your introduction, do you then view EU's farm-to-fork strategy and wider food system efforts to invert the intake of red meat and vegetables given the current rates of intake? Or like you say, are you policymakers ignoring the elephant in the room by not going after processed foods? Or rather, are these two very different lines of action, both of which need to be acted upon?
Mm-hmm. I think there are two different lines. We're talking here about the very specific problem, which is cancer, metabolic health, and diet, and which brings us to the core of the Western disease, which is the ultra-processed foods. That's one debate. The farm-to-fork debate is a much broader one, and it also takes into account sustainability and many other factors. So I think that needs its own discussion. There will be an element of the ultra-processed, and I don't like to speak about processed foods. I think we should differentiate them very well. We're talking about ultra-processed foods here. There should be attention to this as well, of course, but there should also be attention. We should also pay attention to many other things as well. So these are, in my view, two different discussions, although they partly overlap, of course.
So it's not a matter of having two lines opposed to each other, but it's a matter acting on many pressure points, on many dimensions. Thank you, Professor Léroy. Let's go ahead with the panel. Now we go to Spain, to Pedro Gallardo, Vice President of ASACA. Mr. Gallardo, you have 5 minutes for giving your point of view on the topic of today.
Thank you very much, Angelo. Thank you for presentation. Also, thank you, Farm Europe, Coldiretti, for being here. For me, it's a pleasure. Okay, I fully agree with Paolo de Castro arguments, also with Ettore, Prandini, and Professor Léroy, also with Arnold Puech. So I will try not to repeat the same. But as Clara Aguilera, our MEP, said, Meet the Facts campaign, our reference must be the Mediterranean diet. And it consists in many fruits, of course, the meat. We cannot point the finger in the farmers. We must put the finger on the diets. This is something important we consider. One question I would like to ask to Madame Vrije, but she wasn't. In Spain, we have the problem now with education. Now we have indoctrination in school. Now the school said we don't want to put meat in the menu. So we are education in future generation. So this is something that we must consider for future. And also there is an important work generated in the rural area. This is something that society must know. We generate employee, and also in Spain we have the example of the empty Spain, because if farmers are not there, Spain is empty in the center and people go to the coast. And administration must take care of the farmer. Also, one consideration for the European Commission must not fall into the
questo fa in modo da sfalsare tutta la filiera alimentare. Dobbiamo
le cancer. Attention, soyons attentifs, on ne peut pas diaboliser le secteur. Le rôle des organes de contrôle est très important et le point de vue scientifique doit être pris en considération par les politiques et pas l'inverse. J'aimerais d'ailleurs dire quelques mots sur les produits phytosanitaires. Alors, mon grand-père disait qu'il utilisait du poison. Mon père disait qu'il utilisait des pesticides. Et moi, j'utilise le mot phytosanitaire, produit phytosanitaire.
Is wrong. This is the medicine of the plant. One question in the floor. There is one question about the chemical product, the toxic, the combi, etc. Life expectation is the longest in the history. For example, in the 1960s, when there isn't chemical, the life expectation in Spain was 71 years old. Now the expectation for Spanish people is 83 with chemical. So we must take a sustainable and responsible use of the chemical. And this is something that we can consider. I think I would like also to talk about the Nutri-Score. We are very worried. We are very disagree with this question, because don't forget that Mediterranean diet is our heritage for Italian, French, Spain, and the Mediterranean. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Pedro Gallardo for having enlightened also, as also other panelists, the fact that when one says from farm to fork, there are actually farming practices that are under scrutiny, under discussion, in discussion. Now I would one curiosity from a journalist. How's the debate in Spain on frontal pack labeling Nutri-Score? Because I know that the Spanish government wants to adopt it, but maybe stakeholders are not so happy to do that.
Yes, we are not happy, and also we consider that some people in the government are not agree. Some of them are agree, but not all the all the government. So we are going to push, because Nutri-Score is very, very bad, because there is in consideration, for example, in olive oil, etc. And this is the best olive oil in the world and the Mediterranean diet. So we are going to continue pushing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gagliardo. Now the floor, I give the floor to Luigi Scordamaglia, CEO of Filiera Italia, representing the food processors. Mr. Scordamaglia, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Grazie a tutti i partecipanti.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the attendees. And we do appreciate the scientific level of these, the panel of today, because this is indeed
che unisce la produzione agricola alla migliore parte delle industrie alimentari italiane e del retail. Tre parti di una stessa filiera.
Italia distribue les informations et les produits vers les différentes parties prenantes. En effet, nous sommes tous du point de vue que les producteurs et l'industrie sont responsables.
Che l'Italia ha oggettivamente un primato, che è un primato della longevità. Nel 2019 è aumentato di 1/3 il numero degli ultracentenari, oltre 15.000, primi in Europa, così come aumenta progressivamente l'aspettativa di vita. E questo è legato ad una sola cosa, soprattutto ad una cosa, una dieta equilibrata in cui ci sono tutti gli alimenti, nessuno escluso, e i prodotti zootecnici, la carne, sono da sempre parte integrante. Quello che non vogliamo, quindi, sono pericolose semplificazioni, criminalizzazioni, generalizzazioni che non sempre in buona fede tendono ad influenzare il comportamento del cittadino consumatore. La carne rossa è un alimento importante, è già stato ricordato, è un elemento ad alta efficienza nutrizionale, quindi la qualità e la quantità della stessa sono dei principi molto importanti nell'equilibrio nutrizionale. Il professor Léroy ha ricordato molto bene come vada affrontata sempre una contestualizzazione del rischio. Gli esiti dello studio dello IARC, che hanno messo in collegamento salumi e carne e tumori, sono stati spesso disinterpretati, interpretati male. Oggi è chiaro, l'eccesso di carne può far male, è la 13ª causa di aumento del rischio dopo la carenza di fibre, dopo un'alimentazione squilibrata, ma si parla sempre di eccesso. Allora, cosa vuol dire eccesso? Cito ancora il dato italiano. Il consumo reale di carne rossa in Italia, non quello apparente, ma reale, della parte edibile che viene consumata, è pari a 74 grammi al giorno, ben al di sotto della soglia indicata come ottimale dall'OMS e dallo stesso IARC. Quindi equilibrio nella quantità. Importanza della qualità. Non si possono paragonare la carne, i salumi, prodotti ottenuti in Europa con standard estremamente elevati ai prodotti, per esempio, ottenuti in paesi come gli Stati Uniti, dove si fa un massiccio ricorso agli ormoni naturali come promotori di crescita, o a tutta una serie di prodotti di salumi che fanno un grandissimo utilizzo di ingredienti.
Avec des hormones qui, bien sûr, de la viande qui est enrichie, etc., aux hormones. Donc, on ne peut pas comparer des choses qui ne sont pas comparables. En Europe,
I'd like to say again that simplifying too much and trying to find too many shortcuts is the worst that you can do.
Investire 3,1 miliardi nella fake meat per fare disinformazione e dire che prodotti ultra trasformati, ultra processati, costruiti in laboratorio o di chimica possono sostituire il lavoro di milioni di agricoltori. Tra l'altro, Bisognerebbe interrogarsi del perché questi prodotti non vengono sottoposti ai seri criteri di valutazione di trial clinici, come alla fine funziona per i prodotti medicinali a cui sono estremamente simili. Chiudo dicendo: Commissione e Parlamento hanno una grande responsabilità. Devono essere interpreti dell'equilibrio. Nei piani di promozione va benissimo dire che bisogna incrementare il consumo di fibra, di frutta, di verdura, ma non si può dire di ridurre o escludere il consumo di prodotti essenziali come la carne, confondendo ancora una volta l'uso con l'abuso. Credo che questa sia una cosa fondamentale e spero che la serietà, l'oggettività, la trasparenza del dibattito di oggi sia alla base anche dei dibattiti successivi, sia del documento contro il cancro, sia della Farm to Fork che è stata richiamata. Grazie.
Grazie Luigi Scordamaglia. Quantity and quality, use and abuse.
Quindi quantità e qualità, si è detto uso e abuso, questi sono i punti su cui insistere e che bisogna considerare secondo il signor Scordamaglia. Finora siamo andati molto bene, abbiamo ancora 5 minuti da dedicare alle domande eventuali da parte dei partecipanti al nostro seminario. Se non ve ne fossero, allora ne vorrei fare 2 io. Allora, per quanto riguarda questa etichettatura doppia sulla parte frontale e posteriore dei prodotti, questo è un...
There are different systems that are working in Europe. There is the keyhole and voluntary system in the northern part of the continent. There is the Nutri-Score, and after that there is also the Italian Nutri-Inform. One point is that while the other two, the keyhole and the Nutri-Score, are currently used in the supermarkets on food products, the Nutri-Inform has been adopted, but there is no actual use, if I'm not wrong. What do you say about that? Is this a weak point? Is this a weakness of the system? Who wants to reply? Presidente Prandini?
Noi riteniamo che sicuramente.
Well, we think that surely everything that has got to do today with the principles used, especially on the Nutri-Score, are not clear at all. It's not that you can say with one color, you know, if something is good for you, for your health, some foods are good or not. We have been insisting today on a correct form of interpretation. So it's very important to say that the proposal that had been carried out and promoted by Italy on the good labeling is just going, you see, into this direction. You must have the good quantity that should be consumed during a day of that particular product without having any biases as far as the different types of food is concerned. So Coldiretti does not want to have as a target group farmers, but the citizens, because we think that you must inform people as much as you can and in the best way as you can. When you Unfortunately, there was a problem with the channel. As far as the labeling, again, is concerned, what do we think about it? That you have to state the origin, the member state, and this should push those countries which are not very much evolved on the product quality to accelerate, in that direction. And this is a possibility to evolve yourself and to grow and develop at European level. The European level has got, what is this?
Avere dei disciplinari particolarmente rigidi che vanno a tenere in considerazione tutte le cose di cui abbiamo discusso e parlato in questa mattinata.
Se posso aggiungere una cosa, soltanto una cosa, parliamo di lotta al cancro. Tutti gli scienziati mondiali sono d'accordo che più è ultra trasformato il prodotto, più è aggiunto ingredienti sintetici, peggio è. Bene, il sistema Nutri-Score avvantaggia, per esempio, con un bel verde un prodotto che al posto di uno zucchero naturale ha un dolcificante chimico, o avvantaggia con un bel verde una carne di sintesi, una fake meat, in cui ci sono tanti ingredienti chimici per rendere simile un vegetale acidificato al sapore della carne. Come facciamo a dire che questo sistema premia la qualità?
Grazie Luigi Scordamaglia. We are approaching to the final remarks.
Grazie dei vostri interventi. Passerei a questo punto la parola ad Alessandra Moretti per le osservazioni finali.
Moretti.
Ringrazio tutti gli oratori con Luigi Scordamaglia.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais vraiment remercier tous les orateurs. Merci beaucoup aux organisateurs de cet événement.
Léroy, di Vrije e di tutti gli altri che sono intervenuti oggi. Io credo che la politica, prima di prendere qualsiasi decisione, debba mettersi in ascolto della scienza, in ascolto ovviamente di tutte le voci che autorevolmente ci possono dare un contributo attraverso un confronto franco, serio, come quello che c'è stato stamattina. Io ringrazio il collega De Castro e ringrazio davvero tutti per i contributi importanti. Oggi stiamo vivendo un momento delicatissimo, è una crisi sanitaria senza precedenti, siamo alla vigilia di uno dei piani di rilancio e di sviluppo economici più importanti della storia recente europea e dobbiamo avere chiarissima la direzione verso la quale vogliamo andare. E anche nel campo della salute ci sono sviluppi importanti, perché la pandemia ha messo in evidenza la fragilità dei sistemi sanitari nazionali e la necessità di andare verso un'Unione Europea della salute. Credo che sia giunto il momento di un'Europa sempre più protagonista nella tutela del diritto alla salute ed è in questo, binario che si inserisce il Cancer Plan, che è senza dubbio un ottimo punto di partenza, rappresenta davvero un'occasione senza precedenti per affrontare il tema del cancro in maniera coerente e in maniera comprensiva. E uno dei punti fondamentali della lotta al cancro è quello della prevenzione, che si articola in diverse fasi, ma che ritrova nell'alimentazione uno degli aspetti più complessi, oltre che importanti. Benché fattori come l'avanzamento dell'età, la familiarità siano alla base di molte neoplasie, gli stili di vita e anche le abitudini alimentari sono senza dubbio tra i fattori di rischio più importanti. E il messaggio che noi dobbiamo far passare qui oggi è di fare attenzione alla complessità del problema. Dobbiamo avere una visione ampia. Non esistono cibi da demonizzare, ma esistono cattive abitudini alimentari. Il ruolo dell'autorità pubblica deve essere quello di aiutare le persone a sviluppare stili di vita salutari, senza scivolare in un vortice paternalistico. Lo sappiamo bene, che l'abuso di alcol o di cibi grassi è sicuramente nocivo, ma esiste una differenza enorme tra un uso consapevole e responsabile di moderazione di alcol, per esempio un buon bicchiere di vino a pasto, rispetto ad un uso smodato. Pensiamo ad esempio dei superalcolici. Ma esiste anche una differenza enorme se il consumo è di un adulto o di un giovane ragazzo. Esistono quindi sfumature che difficilmente possono essere inquadrate in uno schema semplicistico, binario, di bianco o di nero, giusto o sbagliato. Quindi non esistono cibi o alimenti da condannare, ma esistono buone abitudini alimentari che devono essere insegnate fin dalla giovane età. Esistono stili di vita corretti, salutari, come l'attività fisica regolare, l'abbandono della sedentarietà, una dieta completa, il più possibile varia, la dieta mediterranea, quella che De Castro ha citato. Proprio su questo punto poi mi sento anche di ricordare un'altra cosa. Molte volte il problema di un'alimentazione corretta è sì culturale, ma guardate che è anche di natura socio-economica. Esistono dati che mettono in relazione bassi redditi con un'alimentazione di bassa qualità e la predisposizione maggiore a malattie varie, tra cui anche il cancro. Il problema di una sana e corretta alimentazione...
Nous devons également tenir compte de l'environnement social. Évitons les habitudes qui ne sont pas équilibrées. Ça, je pense que c'est un élément clé également. Voilà, je voudrais peut-être clôturer cette intervention sur un point positif et dire que ce plan de lutte contre le cancer est une très belle opportunité, effectivement.
There must be spoken about and improved. Simplifications, like Mr. Scoldamaglia just said, does not help. So we have to coordinate and talk to each other, to cooperate with one another, following a rational scheme which is based on science and data. So no propaganda here, but yes, to real and effective help to people, helping people to choose on the base of good information and in defended good lifestyle. A balanced diet has got to be promoted, and even labeling must respect these principles, inform and not influence. So the policies which are made here in Europe are based on science and must produce a long-seen policy, taking into account all points of view. Thank you very much for having given us this opportunity today.
A member of the European Parliament, for 5 minutes for his final remarks. Just one word before giving the floor to Mr. Dorfman, MEP. There are still questions left on the chat. We have no time to answer to them, so please use the chat to exchange. This is the way to do. Arrived at 10:30. We have the last speech from Herbert Dorfman. Please, Mr. Dorfman.
Buongiorno a tutti, grazie per questa opportunità.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having invited me to this very interesting debate. I would...
Una considerazione forse ovvia, però che non vorrei ricordare. Il cancro è una malattia terribile. E bisogna fare di tutto per avere meno casi di cancro in Europa o per adressare tutti i problemi che possono causare il cancro. E tra l'altro, e per quello sono d'accordissimo con mia collega Alessandra Moretti, che dice che il piano contro il cancro è un approccio che sicuramente ha delle debolezze, però che di per sé è un approccio giusto, come tra l'altro non è stato ricordato ancora in questo nostro convegno qui, anche il Parlamento europeo in questo momento ha un comitato speciale su questo argomento e produrrà un documento finale. Anche lì gli argomenti che giustamente oggi sono stati detti devono essere indirizzati. Farei un'altra considerazione che mi è un po' mancata oggi, sinceramente. Se la lotta al cancro passa anche attraverso una nutrizione più equilibrata, anche di più alta qualità, questo è un problema per l'agricoltura o è un'opportunità? Io penso che sia una grande opportunità. Io penso che dire alla gente in Europa: guardate, se voi mangiate bene, state attenti a quello che mangiate, mangiate prodotti di alta qualità, il pericolo che vi prendete un cancro è minore, è una grande opportunità per l'agricoltura. L'agricoltura non ha nessun interesse che la gente si mangi il junk food. E quindi è questo anche un approccio generale che proprio come rapporteur nella strategia Farm to Fork cerco di portare avanti, con tutte le debolezze critiche che faccio a questa strategia, però di per sé avere un settore alimentare a più alto valore in Europa è un'opportunità per l'agricoltura europea. E poi chiaramente ci sono dei settori specifici che dobbiamo indirizzare. È stato ricordato giustamente il vino. Io penso che il settore stesso, soprattutto il vino, ma anche degli alcolici in generale, da anni lavora il settore stesso per un consumo moderato. Il settore del vino non ha nessun interesse che abbiamo in Europa prodotti di bassa qualità che servono alla gente per ubriacarsi. Anzi, è un problema per il settore stesso. Quindi il richiamo al consumo in moderazione non è solo un interesse della sanità pubblica o della lotta al cancro, è un interesse del settore stesso. Il settore stesso ha interesse che il vino che produciamo in Europa sia di alta qualità e sia consumato da più gente possibile e non da pochi che bevono troppo. E quindi direi proprio da questo punto di vista ancora di più ci serve la promozione. Ancora di più ci serve la promozione a livello internazionale per dire a tutto il mondo, ai 7-8 miliardi di persone in giro per il mondo, dire: noi abbiamo vini di altissima qualità, bevete i nostri. Perché noi non abbiamo nessun interesse che il consumo e la produzione che abbiamo in Europa venga concentrata sul consumo di pochi. E quindi è follia dire dobbiamo fare meno promozione, perché questo significherebbe produrre meno vino in Europa, alla fine distruggere le nostre regioni. Faccio un po' il provocatore sulla carne rossa. Ma è veramente un problema per l'Unione Europea se produciamo un po' meno di carne rossa perché la gente se ne mangia un po' meno? Considerato che 17 milioni di tonnellate di soia ogni anno vanno a finire nelle nostre stalle per produrre carne e latte. 17 milioni di tonnellate, 40 kg a testa. O dobbiamo forse ripensare un po' la nostra produzione? Io penso che tutta questa massa importata di soia che viene trasformata in carne e latte in Europa, alla fine non serve agli agricoltori. Agli agricoltori, se producono un po' di meno, lo producono basato sul prodotto che abbiamo in Europa, sul prato stabile che abbiamo in Europa, sulle proteine che possiamo produrre di più in Europa. Per gli agricoltori non è un problema. Per quello non c'è un abbandono del territorio, come ho sentito oggi. Non c'è nessun abbandono del territorio se la gente mangia più frutta e verdura e meno carne in Europa, perché la frutta e verdura viene prodotta in Europa, la soia viene prodotta in Brasile. Se noi mangiamo oggi in 40 kg di zucchero all'anno, 100 grammi al giorno. La gran parte importata da fuori. Se mangiamo un po' di meno, è un grande problema per l'agricoltura? Io penso di no. Io penso che noi dobbiamo essere aperti. Se mangiamo 10 milioni di tonnellate di mele, però 15 milioni di tonnellate di pollo, siamo sicuri che va tutto benissimo? O forse sarebbe meglio mangiare 10 milioni di tonnellate di pollo e 15 milioni di tonnellate di mele? Questo non cambia il reddito degli agricoltori. Perché gli agricoltori poi si adatteranno, e questo non succede da un anno all'altro, gli agricoltori si adatteranno a una produzione diversificata. Io vorrei concludere qui, io penso che noi dobbiamo prendere scientificamente l'approccio, evitare ogni deriva, come è stato detto oggi, prettamente ideologico, di lotta alle carni, di lotta all'alcol, di lotta al zucchero, a indirizzare le cose in maniera scientifica e cercare di cogliere le nostre opportunità che ci sono e cercare di dire alla gente che il mangiare bene, il mangiare il prodotto europeo, il mangiare le nostre qualità, le nostre produzioni di eccellenza fa bene, fa piacere tra l'altro anche, non fa solo bene, fa anche piacere ed è un contributo alla lotta a questa malattia terribile. Grazie ancora per questo convegno veramente interessante e buongiorno a tutti.
Grazie Herbert Dorfman, thanks to Herbert Dorfman.
Grazie a lei per il suo intervento.
Of consumption patterns, of discussing consumption patterns as well as production patterns and the scientific approach and no ideology, call for no ideology are recurrent themes. Have been recurrent themes in that day in this webinar that I conclude because we are 7 minutes out of time. So thanks to Coldiretti, Filiera Italia and Farm Europe for having organized this webinar, the contribution of agri-food sector to the European Commission's Beating Cancer Plan. And I thank all the participants. Alessandra Moretti, Paolo De Castro, Claire Bury, Professor Frédéric Léroy, Irène Tolleret, Ettore Prandini, Arnold Puech d'Alissac, Pedro Gagliardo, Luigi Scordamaglia, Herbert Dorfman. Thank you all for being with us, and see you the next time, I hope.